So, the name of today's talk, as I said, is The Power of Having Faith and Doubt. The name was Be Still My Soul, and that particular version was by Vocal Point. We will be pulling from a talk that was done by Pastor Dave Ferguson called Can Faith and Doubt Coexist? We will be having scriptural references to doubt. So, the Christian theologian Paul Tillich says doubt isn't the opposite of faith, it is an element of faith. So that's what we're going to be working with. There are many, many stories from the Bible. I almost made this whole talk about Bible stories because there are so many of them, but there are many stories in the Bible about people that have doubted the existence of God and the existence of Jesus and his presence in our lives, starting in the very, very first chapter of Genesis, where Abraham doubted whether God would make good on his promise to give him and Sarah a child, which obviously he did. He gave him Isaac. In the book of Kings, Elijah doubted whether God was still with him. In Luke, Mary had doubts about how she could be pregnant. In John, Andrew had doubts about how Jesus could feed 5,000 people. And faith is not an absence of doubt. It is to keep believing in the midst of doubt. So in the Here's What I Know part, we will be talking about why is this happening to me? That question that we sometimes have over and over again, and more. I will be talking about what if this doesn't get better? So we will discuss the very real tug of war between faith and doubt. So I'm first going to be pulling from the Can Faith and Doubt Coexist by Pastor Dave Ferguson. So he was sitting having coffee one day, and one of his congregants came up to him and he complimented him on how much he loved the church and how much he loved the small group he was in and all of the friends that he had there. And he was holding a piece of paper, and the pastor asked him what it was. And so he said to him that it was a program from a funeral. And on the cover was a picture of a young fireman that had just passed, and it turned out that that was his son. And he said he was really trying to find his way back to God. He said, there are so many people in the world who are not nice people. Why would God allow my son to be taken? And he was just overcome with grief and not understanding his son was a really good guy. How could this possibly have happened? And so he says, in moments like these, we feel the tug of war between faith and doubt. We want to have faith. We believe that God is here and that he is good. As much as we want to have faith, it feels like doubt pulls our heart and our minds in opposite directions. We find ourselves asking why. There is a real tension between faith and doubt. We really want faith to win. The question is, what do we do when we are being pulled in both directions, when we are having both faith and doubt? The tension between faith and doubt always has been there. So people like to romanticize the Bible times and say, well, if we lived back then where Jesus was there, if we could look in the presence of his eyes, look in his eyes, be in his presence, actually feel him, we wouldn't have any of these problems with doubt because he'd be right there in front of us. So it wouldn't be like that. But that's not true at all. There are lots of Bible stories about when people didn't have faith. They said that if they couldn't see him, they wouldn't feel this tension and they would be full of faith. But Mark tells us of a story of three of his closest friends, Peter, James, and John, who had a huge faith-building experience. This starts in Mark 9, 2-5. And he says, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. It is good to be on the mountaintop of faith. We all love the mountaintop experiences. When we are on the mountaintop, we are celebrating all that God has done in our lives. In these moments, God is real, faith is reasonable, and it all makes sense. It's not just the mountaintop experiences when we feel God's presence. There are many other good, solid reasons for faith. We talk about science. So many people think that there is a problem that science is set against God, but that's actually not true at all. Many scientists now and in the past, many leading scientists have stated that faith in God is not only valid, but it is necessary. So the astronomer and physicist Robert Jastrow, who founded NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, he says, astronomers now find that they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation. to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot help to discover. They are said that what either I or anyone else thinks, they have found that there's a supernatural force at work that is now, he said, I think, a scientifically proven fact. That's from Robert Jastrow, his book, God and the Astronomers. Albert Einstein, who is one of the greatest scientists of all time, says, the more I study science, the more I believe in God. Science actually encourages us to grab hold of faith. Many serious scientists who studied the facts of the universe, its order, its fine-tuning, its intricate design, are led to conclude that there must be a God who created it all. Whether it is science or your own personal experience, there are lots of reasons to have faith. When we hear all the evidence, we feel the tug moving more to the side of having faith. Most of us want faith to win. We know faith is good, but we all know that there are times in life when we are not on the mountaintop. When you spend time in the valley, you have doubt. Something might have happened in your life that has shaken you to your core and you struggle. Recently, he says, this pastor was talking about, he went to a funeral of a young mom who had passed away very quickly and unexpectedly, who had left behind 3 beautiful kids. He said it was the worst kind of funeral. All funerals are bad, but this was particularly bad because there was so much shock involved. There were so many questions, so many what he calls what ifs. What if I got it earlier? What if she could have known how long she had? What if I could have done something differently? That's how doubt works. The unexpected suffering rattles our faith. It stirs up our anxiety. We feel the pull of the what ifs, and doubt starts to win over the tug of war. His favorite story about faith comes right after the mountaintop story, and it's also of the same people involved. That they were just coming down the mountain. After they came down, there was Jesus and his disciples were there, and there was a huge big crowd of people. And amongst that crowd, they met with a man who was desperate to get help for his son. So this is coming from Mark 9:17. Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. The father had believed that Jesus and his disciples could do something about his son's situation, but it hadn't worked out. He had faith, but his experiences had started to pull him more in the direction of doubt. Jesus responds in Mark 9:19, you unbelieving generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. Now, this is a little bit jarring because he's being a little bit angry and a little bit, maybe more frustrated. And the pastor said that he had to study this from many different angles to try to understand that this is not normally who Jesus is, that he is this upset. And he says he finally came to understand that he thinks Jesus is saying, I don't have that much time left with you. You've got to get this message that I've been telling you all along. You've got to get this, as if he's saying this anxiety that you are feeling, the questions that you are having are not going to go away. In other words, all your life, you're going to have some anxiety. You're going to have questions. You're going to have this tug of war between faith and fear, and you're going to have doubt. He said, you're not always going to have me with you like you do right now. So the father brings the son to Jesus, and Jesus asks, how long has he been like this? And the father says, from childhood, he answered. He has gotten often thrown into the fire or into water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. That's Mark 21. If you can. So he was not sure. Nothing has not worked out so far. But you need to understand the word pity in this context actually means compassion. The father says to Jesus, feel my pain. I'm desperate if you can help. The what ifs haven't gone away. Jesus, recognizing the father is struggling with this doubt, says, if you can, said Jesus, everything is possible for those of you who believe. That's Mark 9:23. Immediately, the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. So there's the tug of war right there. Both feelings are happening at the same time. So the tug of war of emotions is that he kind of believes and he kind of doesn't believe. Pastor Dan says, I have felt that way every decade of my adult life. You just feel it in your gut. The most important idea comes to the tension between faith and doubt. The most important thing about that idea is the word and. If you find yourself struggling in tension of faith and doubt, understand that faith and doubt can coexist. It's almost in all of us, almost always. Your doubts are not the enemy of your faith, can actually lead you to a deeper, greater faith. Your doubts, if you pursue them, can lead to trusting more. The doubts can also make you feel paralyzed, afraid, or stuck. Some people who struggle are in a season of deconstruction, where they question everything that they once believed. Others even walk away from their faith. The pandemic shook many, many people. Some people pulled away from their church. Some people moved away from all of their friends in the church. They pulled away from their faith towards doubt. Some stopped praying altogether. Some even pulled away from God. For others, they pulled away from God because of a disappointment within the church or a hurt that happened because of a church. There's always something that happened. He said a story, a leader who disappointed them, or a conflict in the church that went unresolved. Pastor Dan says he knows what it's like to be hurt or disappointed with church, disappointed in leaders who have failed or have fallen. Sometimes he says he feels like there are so many reasons to have doubt, but he keeps thinking about this invitation to live in the faith and the doubt. How do you do that? Well, there's 3 ways that he gives us to do that. First thing you can do is express your doubt. When you let doubt stay in your mind, they begin to overpower us. Express them to someone else. Doubt is not the enemy to faith, but unexpressed doubt can be. Find a safe person and tell them what you are thinking. If somebody comes to you with doubts, listen. Ask questions. Seek to understand. Your listening ear will be more valuable than the advice you may feel compelled to give them. Second, join a small group of like-minded people. Process your doubts with a group of others who are finding their way back to God, a group of people that are learning together how to be our best selves and how to feel more the presence of God. Trust Jesus, God, with your doubts. You're going through periods of uncertainty with regard to your faith, or to jobs, or to your relationship with significant other. You have to start reconstructing what you have deconstructed. The question of faith and doubt comes down to, who are you going to trust? Pray to God, if you are real, make yourself real to me. Trust God with whatever you are going through. So he says he's reminded of the story of a young girl named Agnes who had faith. She was passionate about following Jesus. She wanted to do great things for God. She knew that God wanted to use her. She had a calling on her life. She even left her home when she was very, very young, and she became a missionary. She committed absolutely everything that she had to God. Then God left her, or that's how it felt. Much of the time, she said she felt this way. She wrote these words, "Where is my faith? Deep down, there's nothing but emptiness and darkness. My God, how painful is this unknown pain." She didn't deny the doubt. She continued to work. She continued to serve. She continued even to smile. And she chose to trust God and walk by faith, even though she struggled many times to even feel the faith. This inner darkness and dryness and pain over the absence of God continued for many, many years, with only brief respite. Such was the secret pain of Agnes, who we all better know as Mother Teresa. Rest assured, God is not put off by our doubts. When the man said to Jesus, "I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief," Jesus didn't respond with anger, maybe a little frustration, but not anger. He responds instead by healing the man's son. Jesus loves him right in the middle of his faith and doubt. Jesus answers his prayer in the middle of his faith and doubt. God loves us in the middle of our faith and doubt. It always comes back to that question, who are you going to trust? Are you going to just trust yourself? We are all going to trust someone in this tension. What if together we decided we are going to trust God, both today, tomorrow, and every day? There is simply no one more worthy of our trust. All right, so we're going to go to scripture, talk a little bit about doubt. James 1:2. Count it all joy, my brothers. You hear me say this all the time when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. John 14:27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Proverbs 3:5, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Matthew 7:7, God promises to hear us when we speak to him and to provide in the way that he thinks is best for us. Matthew 14:28, Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? So he was doing fine. He actually did the impossible. He walked on the water, but then he saw the wind and he became afraid, and the fear is what actually took him down. Jude 1:22, and have mercy on those who doubt. Isaiah 41:10, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. And John 20:27, then he said to Thomas, put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. That poor man has lived forever in our minds as doubting Thomas. I'm sure you all know that story. Okay, so here's what I know. I'm going to tell you this was a hard one for me because I haven't ever not felt the presence of God. I talked about it last week. You know that I started to feel the presence of God very, very firmly when I was 9 years old, and I've never not felt it. But I have had questions. There was another sermon that I was listening to while I was studying for this where the man said, I can't feel your presence. I don't know if you are good and I don't care. I just want my wife back. He was also a minister and he had just lost his wife. He lived in this questioning period for quite a long time, but he eventually came back to God. So I have always known that God was with me, but I have had experiences of why is this happening and what if this doesn't get better? I have been in very dark places. I know that you know this. I have even been suicidal, but it was not because I didn't know that God was there. It was because the pain was too bad and I didn't believe that it would ever get better. So the physical pains, I've talked about this before. The first suicide attempt, I was very, very young. I had unbelievably bad migraines. Those of you who had migraines know that they're horrible and they can last for days. In my case, I also threw up for hours and hours. I couldn't keep down any food. The pain was unbearable and I was throwing up constantly for hours and hours and days. I ended up in emergency rooms on several different occasions because of my migraines. And so that was the physical pain that I got to a place where I said, I just don't know how long I can be like this. And I told my best friend, if I've ever committed suicide, you know that I had another migraine because that's how bad it was. It was just absolutely unbelievable. I don't ever intend to commit suicide, be very clear about that. And then the emotional pain. So I'm going to talk a little bit about addiction. You know that I'm all in recovery. They talk a lot in recovery about filling the God-sized hole. So when I was in addiction, I didn't feel the absence of God, and I never stopped praying. I actually prayed a lot more, saying, please, God, help me. I used various substances and activities to alleviate the pain and make it less intense. But God never left me. I never, ever felt that God left me. I had the forced belief that the life I had was what I deserved. When I became closer to God, I heard his voice more clearly come to me, and I came to understand God really did want me to be happy, joyous, and free. God really did have plans for me to live a rewarding, healthy, and love-filled life. God had wanted me to have a safe, happy, beautiful home in a place where I felt comfortable and secure with friends and family who loved and appreciated me. As my faith in God grew, I took greater risks to achieve a healthy, balanced, and rewarding life. I'm not a planner. I'll be honest with you, I'm very spontaneous. I get an idea in my head. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And so an example of that is, as you know, I went back to school to become, an ordained minister, and I didn't know how it's going to work, but I've done that many times. I've gone back to school and I said, yeah, it feels like the right thing to do. And so I don't plan way far advance. I par a little bit in advance, but a lot of that is because of my belief that God is always with me and God will always give me the directions when I need to get there. So I think of the analogy they give you that when you're in the dark tunnel, you can't see the end of the tunnel, but at the end of the tunnel, there is a light. And at the times of my life where I didn't know what the answers were, I was always absolutely convinced that God would tell me when I got there, which direction I was supposed to be going in. So I knew that it would all work out, and I always had faith. I still had dark times, as everyone does. I had relationships which ended up causing me much more pain than happiness. And making the decision to end those relationships was excruciatingly painful. And I did have the question, how long will it hurt so much? How can I continue hanging on when I am in this much pain? The recent medical challenge that I had, that you all have heard about so much, you're probably sick of it already, but it lasted so long. In November, it'll be a year. There was lots of physical pain, but the fever and the exhaustion and the endless fatigue is what brought me again to the dark place. And then the question again, how long can I go on like this? And that question kept coming back. I would make it to work, I would come home and then go to bed for months. There was only work and sleep and nothing else. No joy, no fun, no play, just exhaustion. The new medication, as you know, made the pain even worse. And then there was the tear in the rotator cuff. And I'm like, really? Really? Really, God? But I never doubted for a minute that God was with me. I just doubted my own ability to hang on, knowing that it would end and it would get better. And now, as I am thriving again, I am filled with unbelievable gratitude. I wouldn't have this much gratitude if I hadn't gone through all of the bad stuff. I'm able to eat and sleep, and I'm able to stay awake, and I'm able to play and fix up my house, and to be pain-free, and to be really excited about the holidays that are coming up. God never left me. I never doubted that. I now doubted myself only, and my ability to stay positive and remember that it will get better. Faith and doubt, both together, all part of life. In the end, there is great power in having faith and doubt. So far in my life, faith has had the upper hand. The tug of war is real, but so, as always, is the presence and power of God. And so it is. Remember at all times, the power is in you. It always has been, and it always will be.